Hello and welcome to my final project about my professional interview. My name is Archie Savanya and today I'm talking about who I interviewed, correspondence, my interview questions and the answers, and what I learned from this interview. So let's begin. So I decided to interview Douglas Wetterling, a senior staff actuary at the Ameriprise Financial Company. He actually is right now working at the St. Paul location. There he does annuity project development, he prices living benefits, and he also does guaranteed withdrawals and accumulation. A lot of actuarial stats wording there, but basically he does a lot of financing work for life insurance. And I chose to interview him because he works in a pretty similar environment that I would want to work in, somewhere with like insurance or something like that. He's also been working at the same location for about 10 years now, so he knows lots of the ins and outs of the business. He's only been in the actuary field for about 13 years, but he's easy to relate to because he's a younger guy. He graduated from college about 14 years ago, so he knows the more recent upcomings in getting into an actuarial field. So my first question I asked him was, well, what types of communications you use on the job? He replied with mainly emails, but he also does a lot of phone calls and phone interviews especially for job openings that are coming up. And he also uses Skype a lot of times to communicate with his higher ups and other coworkers. My second question was, well, what programs or mediums do you use? You find or present your information that you get based on your research. He said they mainly use Excel there, Microsoft Excel, to compute a lot of their insurance statistics, although he's used a lot of other actuarial programs such as R and Minitab. He likes to present his information just using basic PowerPoint, or even Excel has nice formatting options for him. So I asked him now, in what ways do you make sure you're communicating professionally? And he said, well, you got to make sure your tone of voice is correct, and you got to make sure you double check everything you're saying, either written down or just in your mind when you're speaking it. He also feels like this is one of the most important qualities in actuarial field because you have to be very specific in what you're presenting to anybody in that field. So then I asked him, is there any differences when you communicate verbally versus electronically? He said, not really, but you just have to make sure when you're communicating electronically that you make sure your thoughts are pretty clear and cohesive because you can't perceive tone of voice through an electronic mean. My fourth question was, how do you ensure you have a positive or professional online presence? He said he really doesn't have much of an online presence, but what he does, he just uses the same steps when you communicate professionally. Just make sure your tone of voice is good, double check what you say, all that. And then my final question was, well, what just overall advice would you have for a person that's coming into the field of actuarial science? And he said just to be very professional and very well mannered. That he said that'll get you far in the actuarial field, and that you should always have that in mind when you're communicating with any professional in that field. And what I learned from all this is that professionalism is the key course that's always driven through everything that he said. Any questions I asked was all tied back to professionalism. Another thing I gained from this was always to understand and know your audience, because you would need to use different writing techniques or something like that to keep your audience engaged and make sure you are acting in the right manner towards your audience. And the last thing I learned was that you just have to be always learning and adapting, making sure you're doing things as they should, always adapting to the changing, especially in the actuarial science where things 20 years ago wasn't the same as they are now, and they won't be the same as 20 years in the future.